I'm the executive director of the Christian Evangelistic Association, and our base is here in the Seattle area. I'm a part of a much larger and greater organization here in the Northwest, and together, collectively, we are hosting this fourth workshop in a series. That organization is the Northwest Church Planting Coalition, and it's comprised of, I think, somewhere around 7 or 8 organizations, perhaps a couple more, who are doing great work here, not only in the Seattle area, but throughout the Northwest. Today, we're gathered to take part in a workshop that's titled, What, Why, and How is a Church Phygital? And the subtitle is A Primer for Leveraging the Digital for the Physical Church. And we're gonna go right there. I want to introduce our presenter, primary presenter, Nathan Hawkins, who serves with Stadia Church Planting Ministries. And he will introduce to you his teammate this morning, Jeff Reed, who's also going to share with us. So Nathan, let me roll that ball to you.
Well, thank you, George. I thought you were going to say more in terms of introduction because let's be clear, I have George Johnson to thank for the fact that I'm here in Seattle, Washington, and still involved in church planting. So I owe him and the CEA a tremendous debt of gratitude. Also tremendously grateful for all the other participants in this coalition. They include Dave DeVree, Micah Dodson, Gary Irby, Natalie Hammond, Jen Yost, and a host of other leaders from a bunch of other networks and ministries and denominations. We come together and learn from leaders like George and Gary, who've been at this for a long time, and it's a lot of fun. We're all about the kingdom. So yeah, hey, welcome again, everybody. It is fun to have this conversation, and in order to do it, I did bring a teammate, actually the expert, Jeff Reed, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But to do that, I'm going to tell you first, why do I think that we have any credibility or influence to speak to this topic? And that is because we got into this game BCV, before the coronavirus. We were talking about digital and phygital before everybody was. And that, I think, is the key distinctive as it relates to what Stadia has been able to learn and be a part of. Because God is us to think about what does it mean to do ministry in a digital space. And we came at it from this perspective of multiplication from the jump, because we recognize that digital is another context, just like any other mission field. And so in order to do that, we convened a bunch of thought leaders from the marketplace and the church, one of whom is my co-presenter, Jeff Reed. Jeff, we first met you at that Blue Sky session. It was in the fall of 2019. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Chivo. It was somewhere around October 2019. Ironically, I had no idea who Stadia was. Greg Nettle, president of Stadia, calls me out of the blue, says, "Hey, we need to talk." And so that was a really interesting conversation. My history is more with established churches than church planting, but it's definitely been a fun run.
So yeah, we had this Blue Sky session. Jeff, Greg really felt like, yeah, we need to lean into this. So we brought Jeff onto our team in January of 2020. And he began developing a futurist cohort, which at the time we had about 6 or 8 churches committed to. They were going to do R&D. The plan was 3 years and we'll figure this thing out. And then March hit and a couple of things happened. Of course, Jeff Reed's stock went through the roof and suddenly his phone was ringing off the hook, and the ministry that he has beyond Stadia, which is called the Church Digital, and I highly recommend it to all of you, the Church Digital. You were getting calls from everywhere and everybody wanted to talk to you. And we were just grateful that you were a part of our team. And so we could lean into this whole Phygital conversation. And so what we did at that point was to take, well, we had this burden. All right, we've got this plan, this roadmap. We're going to go 3 years of R&D. We've got a half dozen churches. And when COVID hit, the question was, how do we accelerate the rate of learning and increase the access to that? And I don't know if it was you or someone else on our team who had the insight to suggest, well, hey, what if those two things were related? And what if we could get more churches involved in the R&D process? That would accelerate the rate of learning, and at the same time, it would serve to increase the access to that learning. So that's where the Phygital learning communities were born. And we launched those right after Easter of last year. Jeff, you have been the primary facilitator and convener, curator of all the content. You know all the people that we're learning from, and you've brought them together. Give us an idea, Jeff. Who are some of the friends that you called when we started Phygital?
Yeah, so with the Phygital learning communities, by the way, Chivo, I think you're having some internet issues. So let me kind of talk here for a minute or two, see if you can figure out something on your side with that. Yeah, so with the Phygital learning communities, we set out to listen in digital church. Nobody's got all the answers, and it really came down to this place of everybody's got a little bit, everybody's doing a little something right. And let's learn from each other. Let's bring that learning together, and let's try to help other churches. And so it was like Jay Cran, the digital pastor out of Saddleback. Church Homes executive pastor Mark Venti was available for us. Global Innovations pastor out of Westside Family, Jason Morris spoke and was part of that. And so we had just all sorts, large churches, small churches, church plants, giga churches. Everybody was providing some of this. Honestly, some of the best engagement to a conversation I've ever seen from a church is coming out of a church plant right now that hadn't even started. Like the church planter at the time, Patrick Holden, lived in another state. He was, I think, in Michigan or Minnesota, and he was trying to plant in Ohio. And so he was doing some phenomenal two-way conversations as a result of it. And so the hope was to bring these learnings together and make it easy for other churches to process and also to try to answer some of the questions of, hey, we need to develop a strategy for this, but how do we handle this situation? How do we handle this? Or what does it look like for our specific church to do these things? And so with this, not only the content, but the framework of questions, we really help churches develop that strategy.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. We gave this group a taste of Patrick Holden in the very first webinar that we did. We included a video that shared him. And so I encourage folks, if you haven't already watched that, you can access it via the website where you signed up here, or you might have received a link to the recording. It's also live on YouTube. And in fact, that's where we're going to dive in, is building on that, along with what Dave shared with us in the subsequent session, and then Gary in the last one. So some of the ground that we covered, and I remember this was the very first insight that you shared with me, Jeff, the fact that church online was about relationships, not technology. And I think that kind of burst my bubble right out of the gate. You, in fact, even had a paraphrase of James 1:22, we'll get to in just a moment here in a future slide, but that to me was significant. Tell us, what did you mean by that? Relationships, not technology.
Yeah, it's a misnomer of digital church, of church online. The perception is that you're using the technology to reach millions of people, and those people are watching church in anonymity, in isolation. And it is true, the technology can do that. But just like the church can reach masses, the technology is actually very powerful and very effective at an intimate level, at a one-on-one, at a one-on-two, at a one-on-three. And so the more that we lean on the technology, which left to itself is going to be cold and it is going to be distance. You have to overcome that and battle that with relationships. And some of the most effective digital churches and Phygital churches that are out there today really do look at it of, how do I get one-on-one with people digitally as fast as possible? How can I build that relationship with people digitally? Now, like what I find, just real briefly, is that lens that's right there, that's separating me from all of you people. It actually provides me comfort, peace. I'm actually able to get real with myself because I'm down here in Miami, Florida. Chivo is literally on the exact opposite side of the country from me. And so is Chivo really judging me by anything that I say? Maybe, maybe not. Do I care? The dude's 3 time zones away from me. And so as a result of that,
I don't think that would matter, really, Jeff, would it?
it really doesn't, right? Yeah, and so I'm able to be open and share with things in a digital format, in an intimate format, much quicker than what we see in a physical format. And so,
Jeff, tell him the
given
truth. You're on the other side of that wall behind me. That block right there. It is. It is.
Yeah. So I'm in my guest bedroom. There's literally like a bed right there. My bedroom's actually behind there. No, I'm in Miami, Florida, and so.
Awesome.
But and the beauty of this is we have the opportunity to create relationships
Yes.
with people across the country. We have the opportunity to impact lives with people across the planet. We have the
Yes.
opportunity to learn from people from across the planet, not just push out, but receive in.
All right, I want to get into the how. I want to get into the how. You're whetting our appetites, Jeff. We all showed up like, tell us how, right? So we're going to get into some of the lessons that we've learned from these Phygital communities. So first, just a reminder, level set, this is the material that we covered in our very first webinar where we talked about, can a digital church be biblical? Can a biblical church be digital? And I love the way my co-facilitator Wes reframed it and said, can you be a biblical church and not be digital? So these are all the different modalities and expressions. We'll share this slide deck, so no need to take a picture. There's a lot more links. And you, Jeff, actually facilitated a breakout session in a recent webinar where you talked about all these different modalities, right? You had 3 different ladies actually speaking to that. Can you tell us what that was real briefly?
Yeah, so we're really exploring this idea of churches having multimodals, being different types of churches, because we're discovering that different types of churches reach different types of people. Even just last night, we had a church planter in the Northeast, Massachusetts, launch a digital-only church on Twitch, and it was fascinating. One of the comments that came back from a viewer basically was a guy who said, "I haven't been in church in 10 years. When I was a kid, my parents crammed religion down my throat, and it was a massive turnoff for me for God. Being a part of this service today makes me wonder if this is the path that I need to be on.
Wow.
I'm lonely. I'm looking for something. I'm not sure if this is it, but I'm willing to stick around and give it a shot."
Praise
and so we're
God.
literally seeing a digital church reach a different type of person. And what's
Yes.
interesting is, a Phygital church, similar, is going to reach a different type of person. A house church or a micro location is going to reach a different type of person. And so rather than churches, watch parties are going to reach a different type of person. So rather than just sticking with the one strategy, we're actually challenging churches. Maybe explore a different option, a digital, a more aggressive Phygital, a social media church, a micro location in some neighborhoods. Start to test the waters, because we don't want to just get locked in 2021 into one model. We want to start to explore some of these other models.
Yes. And I think you just tapped into an insight there that may shed some light on why this is so difficult for some of us, because it is a different person or people or community that we're reaching in these different contexts. So for a lot of us in the established church, we can't wait to get back in person. Maybe we're already there. And we're saying, our people didn't engage or they disengaged, and now they're coming back. Digital creates it's a whole other mission field. We're reaching different people, and the key in all of these contexts. This is another one of my initial learnings from you, was that it's all about engagement. Everybody was excited about reach. Oh, I've got X thousand views, and we had so many people on Easter. That doesn't mean anything, right? It's all about engagement. This is your sort of rewriting of James 1:22. But what do you mean by that, Jeff?
Yeah, so we want to be more than just creators of content. If all we are is creators of content, we the church are just creators of content, and we're not seeing that content drive people to action in the real world, where we're exuding the fruits of the Spirit in the physical realm, then we're creating consumers. And we don't say don't just listen to the word quote unquote online and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. The word, the gospel needs to drive towards action. And so who we are in the physical realm needs to match who we are in the digital. And so this is really the standard of doing church online, of doing digital ministry. We don't want to create special hybrid locations where people in digital realm can claim to be Christ and live spiritual lives, but then in the physical realm, they're abusive to their spouse, they yell verbally abusive at their kids, and they steal from the workplace. Like, hypocrite would be the beginning of what we would really call that type of person. And so the standard is, man, with these digital relationships, let's drive people, let's get people impacted to the place that their physical lives are changed as well as their digital.
Amen. Amen. So engagement, what does that look like? We've got some top line. Basically, it's all about moving, or this pivot from broadcasting to interactive communication. And I want to argue that I think a lot of the lessons that we're learning as it relates to Phygital or digital ministry are lessons that apply to the physical church. The fact that COVID revealed or exposed the fact that we had a bunch of consumers before COVID. We were just excited because they showed up and they sat in the back row, and maybe they tipped if they didn't tithe, but they were there. And it was because it was a one-way communication. So today we want that two-way connection. We want to really facilitate that, because that's what the church has to offer. That's why we're not just a content provider. And moreover, why we don't want to compete on content, right? Because I can't keep up with you. I don't have the cool mic and the camera. I'm not, Saddleback or Christ Fellowship or Church Home or whomever. We shouldn't compete there. In fact, I think one of our lessons that we're going to get into here is that we need to become hyper local. Would you say that's true, Jeff?
Yeah, there's an opportunity for us to slice. And it was funny. This is literally what I was typing here to Kyle. Kyle asked a great question. With this bite-sized content and some of this stuff, how do you get specific with an individual? And I think there's an opportunity. We actually had Elevation Church was on that panel last week that Chivo just mentioned, and their watch party pastor, maybe one of the greatest job titles within church ever, watch party pastor, just saying party and pastor are the same. But anyway, Danny Hicks was talking about how with the tens of thousands of people that watch the physical services and with the hundreds of thousands that are watching the digital services, their watch parties is really the place where they get the most intimate, where they're able to hyper focus on specific areas and specific people and specific individuals. And what's interesting with their watch parties, it's more of like a 1 to 15, 1 to 20, maybe even 1 to 10, 1 to 5 model as it's growing up. And so, but it's a smaller set that grows and expands. And then literally what I was going to type to Kyle, and I just didn't get the chance to press, it's all about the multiplication. It's all about, okay, let me multiply. And now I've got 2 people leading this and being hyper local. It's interesting. It was said, as much as we want to be a global church, I think there's an opportunity for us, even in this post-COVID season, wherever you think we are, to not look at the church, especially a digital church, a Phygital church, as a global as much as it is hyper-local, as we're empowering people at an individual level to reach their circle of influence, oikos, so be it, if you're in the physical realm, or even to reach them in the digital realm. And that's where I think it's a lot more interesting if we would release people, not so that they're watching church online services to reach people who are watching these services in anonymity, in isolation. I had a church Easter 2020 say, hey, Jeff, we had 500,000 people. We had 500,000 people view our church service Easter. Hey, is that, I don't know if that what the multiplier was. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, that's a whole bunch of people. Hey, tell me, digital pastor, how many connection cards did you get out of those 500,000 people? How many names? 11. 500,000, and they only had 11 names. That's not a good thing. But if we can release people individually to disciple, to connect with their friends in their circle of influence, that's where we see a lot of the strength of digital come around. It's in that hyper location. It's in that small
All right.
reaching the
So let's
individual.
press into some of the lessons that we've. So good. We'll come back to that as well. I do want to press into some of that. So one of the first things right off the top, and I feel like we kind of made a case for this in the very first webinar, is this notion that if this is the way the world exists, the church really needs to lean into that. And so if people are operating phygitally, and we know that they are, because every major business, every organization, anybody that's worth their salt is operating in a phygital space right now. And by that, we just literally mean the blending or the transcending of physical and digital, right? It's not an either or, it's the both and, right? Say more about where that word comes from, Jeff.
Yeah, so Phygital, it was actually a term way before COVID. It's a business term. And for us, we're applying it in context of using the strengths of physical and digital. Physical and digital actually operate in completely opposite ways when you get down to it. Example, it's much easier in a physical church to meet someone. Hey, you got somebody's a first-time attender, a first-time guest on the back pew. As soon as that service is over, they're going to stand up and start to walk to the car. By the way, they're not going to leave the service early because there's social pressure. People are watching and they don't want to be awkward standing up in the middle of the sermon if they don't like what the pastor's saying. So they're going to stick through the entire service, unlike digital, and they're going to walk out to the car. What's good is that you probably got 47 guest service volunteers, pastors, pastor spouses, elders, ushers, deacons, whatever it is. You got everybody and their mother positioned between that pew and where the parking lot is, hugging, praying for. Would you like to sign up for a small group? Are you interested in serving? Hey, awesome. I've got kids your age. Maybe we can get together. Come hang out with us on a Tuesday night. It's a very relational environment. And so that's the strength of physical. Now, if you want to try to get that person to come back, to actually show up for that small group, not very easy, because the convenience for them is gone. Now, on a digital side, the strength of digital is actually everything that's the opposite. Hey, I can join a small group and it goes at 9 o'clock on a Sunday after the kids are in bed. I don't have to throw them in a car to school night, feed them, get them to do homework as we're driving over, and then get them to try to do a shower once it's late. And listen, I've done physical small groups where we've got 45 minutes because we were more kids than parents. If we could pray in a small group, that was a win. And so in a physical small group, right? And so digitally, I can serve digitally at my schedule. I can watch these services when it's more convenient for me. The strength of digital is actually more towards, hey, I can take them through an assimilation process. I can get connected to them relationally easier in the digital space than the physical. And so this is just one way of really many different ways that we can spin the physical and the digital and find ways to get them to work together. The goal is whatever your mission and vision is, do it in the physical and figure out how digital can complement it.
That's good. That's good. And that actually sets up this next point quite well, because what we're learning is that if you're going to operate in this both and, you need to have an engagement process, a way to connect with people, a discipleship pathway or pipeline that works in both spaces. And it may be different, it may be distinct. So for example, this is an engagement pathway that was shared with us by one of our friends in the Phygital Learning community, Doug Parks from Intentional Churches, which is a great ministry. Encourage you to check them out. This is what they came up with one of their church partners in Las Vegas. And so you can see it's a funnel, and there's some correlation between what they do in an online and what they do on site. But there's a pathway, and they're trying to engage with people and move them from the top of the funnel down into the core ministry of their church. So that's just one example of a Phygital engagement pathway. So every church needs something like this. And that's probably the biggest takeaway a lot of churches get out of the Phygital Learning community. Jeff, you've seen lots of examples of these churches building something like this that's contextual for their congregation, for their community, where they're at, the resources they have. Can you tell us about some others you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's important here is, don't start radical. If you're struggling with how to even wrap your brain around this, do what you're doing physically and do it digitally. But watch, observe, experiment, because I can tell you right off the bat, you're going to learn lessons quickly. Even just coming down to this, how do I discover who these people are that are watching our services online? because it's very easy to become that church that's got 500,000 viewers and only 11 connection cards. And so you start to maybe do something different, like a public Facebook group, or maybe even some intentional marketing before the services that drive where you're connecting with people before the services and then driving them into the service. The church service struggles really to be that front door digitally, because it is so easy to be that church with 500,000 viewers and only 11 connection cards. So you're going to have to adapt, you're going to have to adjust, but that doesn't mean that the payoff's not worth doing in the digital space. You find ways to modify through it.
One of the churches I think they were in the second round of Phygital. They're a Seattle-based church, and they were really struggling with how do we build something like this for our context. And they discovered that they had a young woman who had become a part of the church since the advent of COVID. And so someone had the insight, hey, why don't we just ask her how she got here? And they literally interviewed her and said, hey, how did you connect with our church? And she said, well, somebody from your church that I was related to or had a friend or mutual shared something on Facebook. I clicked into that. I started sort of watching online. They said it was a multi-month process before she ever even turned on her camera. And then eventually she showed up. But they just reverse engineered this, engagement pathway based on a real person's experience, which I thought was genius, by the way. So, all right, so we have to have an engagement funnel. The other thing that we need to have is an entire team, or at least not just one person, particularly if it's a point leader, a senior pastor. That person can't be the only one that's concerned with technology. He can't or she can't be the person. Ideally, we want a team. In fact, what we've argued in this context is that the lead pastor's primary role right now is to fulfill these functions. And then they need a team around them who can, and they don't all have to be staff. We can have volunteers. You mentioned Patrick Holden earlier. I mean, he's an example of a church planner who's doing this without, I don't think if he has any other staff, but he's got a lot of volunteer people. Lots of people need to be involved with this technology. And then here's another insight. You're going to have to reprioritize some of your ministry resources. You're going to have to reorg your team and adjust congregational expectations. Jeff, I think it was it Mark Venti who told us that, when it happened, everybody's job description got thrown out the window and they all had to reapply for their jobs. How did that work?
Yeah, like Mark Venti tells the story of his own wife was in a leadership position, not senior leadership, but leadership position. And Mark's own wife's job was ripped up and said, hey, congratulations, you're going to have to reapply. Here are the new roles coming. Now, that's a radical approach. And Mark, I'm happy to say, his marriage stayed strong even through the entire thing. But the observation here is, I had a church tell me, hey, Jeff, we've got we don't have the resources to put towards doing the digital. Awesome. Hey, how much resources do you put towards your just tell me, ballpark, with your church, how much resources goes towards physical, budgeting, staffing, other resources? How much goes towards digital? Physical versus digital. Oh, Jeff, that's easy. 99% of our budget goes towards physical, and then, scraps go towards digital. Cool. Hey, tell me, how many people are physically in your building right now? And the answer, like probably most of you, 30, 40, maybe 50. We're pushing for them to go back, but it's funny. The more that we push the people that don't want to come to the building, the more that I think we disenfranchise and maybe pull them away. If we want to really connect with that disenfranchised 20%, we're not going to get them back. We're not going to get them reconnected by trying to drive them into physical space. We're going to have to do that digitally and build those relationships long distance that may at one point bring them back to the physical realm. Or maybe, just maybe, we can figure out how to actually be the church for them digitally and not necessarily even need that physical building.
So the point here is we've got to be willing to make some changes to reprioritize or reallocate resources. And the reason for that is best summed up with this quote. I think we got this, I don't know where, but it sounds like General Eric had some insights here. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. and that is definitely a truism in the church today. We are having to adapt. So let's press on into more of these engagement lessons. We talked about the engagement pathway, but to take it a step further, we really think that every church needs to have a discipleship process, a leadership pipeline, and if they don't, they're setting themselves up for failure. I mean, this is where we spend a lot of time in the Phygital learning community. It's talking about leadership pipeline. It's all these lessons that transcend physical or digital. I mean, you've been talking to a lot of people about discipleship lately.
Yeah, thank you. Let me tell a quick story, 2 minutes. The top marketing guy in the country, probably right now, one of the greatest mind spaces right now is guy named Seth Godin. He's not Christian. He's actually Jewish. But Google Purple Cow, Google Seth Godin, wealth of knowledge if you've not been connected with him. Once again, not a Christian, but very forward-thinking in a lot of things. Somebody asked Seth Godin, how do you get your message heard around the world? And Seth, being the marketing brain that he is, said 1 billion people do not care about anything you have to say. There's no way to get 1 billion people to agree on anything. 100 million, 10 million, 1 million, 100,000, 10,000. Look, you want to change the world, you tell the smallest number of people possible. You get them to own it, you get them to replicate it, tell someone else, and it spreads like that. Seth Godin, Jewish, not a Christian, actually describes the way the church was built 2,000 years ago by Christ and also in the book of Acts. And
I was going to say, that sounds pretty Jesus-y to me. Yep, I like that. I like that. In fact, I mean, this is what COVID has done, right? It's forced us all to become missionaries. We've been expelled from the church, not by choice, but by pandemic. And we have this opportunity now. And this is critical. No, I love it. I think you wrote a blog post on that, right, Jeff? And we can find that at the Church Digital, correct?
Yeah, so thechurch.digital. I'll throw a link here in a second where I'm pretty
sure it'll show up. Awesome. Okay, this one was encouraging for me. This was one of our takeaways. Everybody take a deep breath, sigh of relief. No one's got student ministry figured out. No one has figured out how to do children's ministry in a digital space. There are some churches that are putting out some really great content. I'm leaning into it. My kids actually say, Dad, can we watch church? Thank you. I'm not even going to name the church, but they're doing a good job. Use your imagination. But it's at the end of the day, it puts the onus back on us as parents to say, okay, we need to accept responsibility for discipling our own children. We thought we could outsource it with amazing student ministry. Oh, you know what? That's meant to complement what we do. But Phygital has exposed you cannot outsource ministry to young people. So. And then finally, Jeff, we talk a lot about the one at Stadia. What are we referencing? What do we mean by the one?
Yeah, in digital environments, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. I don't know the exact number. There's something like 7 billion people that have Facebook accounts. The largest nation on the planet is actually Facebook users. And Phygital, even physical pastors are salivating. Oh my gosh, I want to reach the nation of Facebook. What's interesting is, okay, remember once again, Seth Godin, and I don't want to treat it as biblical fact, but you're not going to get 1 billion people to agree with you. And so often, instead of thinking big, if you really want to be effective in digital ministry, it's smaller and more multiplying. And that's really where the one is. Help people find the one that they want to go after. So that everyone in the church, we've got our 99. We've got our attenders. We've got the people who are active in our church, serving, giving, whatever it is. These are the 99. These are the people that are loyal.
We love the flock. We love the flock.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's necessary in the church, even more today than ever before. But if all we are is looking at those, and we're not looking at the lost sheep, the biblical parable, and we're not helping as a church, we're not reaching and focusing on not just the flock, but the individuals, or even the ones, the people that are far from Christ, or even, hey, let's help our 99. Let's train them to share their faith, train them to tell their story of what Christ has done for them. And now, hey, you 99, go find your ones. Let's not as a church, let's not just be focused on our organizational one. Instead, let's also encourage people to reach their individual ones. The reach of our church is much broader if we can figure out how to mobilize and release our people, get our 99 away from being consumers, and instead get them to the place where they can be activators out there doing evangelism, sharing the gospel with people in need.
So this tees up this topic. We already spoke to this a little bit, but for the vast majority of churches, there's a few exceptions that are producing great children's ministry content that I want to continue to do that. But the rest of us need to focus on being hyper-local. We talked about that a minute earlier. One of the resources that we like to point people to, just because they're our friends and we really like Dave and Jay, is this book, The Art of Neighboring by Dave Runyon, Jay Pathak. It's a great resource. There's a lot of stuff out there like that, but paying attention to your local context is critical. And then finally, this notion of this is a season of experimentation, of trial and iteration. We talk a lot about we have an opportunity here to try some things that we wouldn't otherwise do. And then to experiment. We're not moving the goalposts. We're just saying, hey, today we're going to try this, and tomorrow we might do something different. So there's a lot of iteration going on in these Phygital learning communities. Anything come to mind off the top of your head, Jeff, as we think about that, or should we keep going here?
We definitely need to experiment. I mean, every playbook, every rule book, every strategy that existed February 2020, is now worthless. Culture shifted so quickly, we the church, we need to adjust. You're not going to get it right the first time. Keep trying. Work through it.
Keep going. Oh, I love it. That's good. All right, 10th lesson. And this is one of those painful realities, but it's been exposed. We saw it, BCV, physical presence did not equal spiritual growth. And so we have to assume the same to be true for the digital. Just because someone's watching, just because someone showed up online, or even they engaged, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are growing in their faith. So this is where we want to pause for a moment. We're going to jump into some breakout rooms. We're going to go for about 10 minutes here. Jeff, you're going to lead one of them. So we're all hoping we hit the lottery and end up in your room. But let's take a few minutes to really break this down in breakout rooms. We're going to ask, what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, and what's confusing. So, Jen, if you would send us away, and we'll see you all back here in just a few minutes. Welcome back. Hey, Jeff, I think we're going to lose you here in just a couple of minutes. So I want to make sure that you have a chance to share any parting words or wisdom, and that you be sure to let people know how they can follow up with you at the Church Digital. And then we'll press on. We've got some more insights, but I know you got to run. So what do you want to leave us with?
Hey, awesome. I am going to hit my little magic button here. There is all of my contact info for the Church Digital through Stadia, of course. My text me. That's my cell phone number. Would love to be an asset. There was a great question. I just want to hit it real quickly in the group that I was in. Hey, Jeff, we've lost a lot of volunteer leaders. We're not getting them back. It's hard to get them back. We're not sure it's back. We don't know what to do. And what I would suggest in this is a great season to cast new vision, to re-engage, to come up with something new that gives them an opportunity to really, really get out there and serve. So like we're talking about this whole, and we didn't use the language, but church's platform, where we're talking about disciple making and multiplication and some of this. So the bottom two links there is the Stadia Phygital link, as well as this church's platform. And this is really where me as a church, I'm not able to preach the message and connect with all the people. Maybe it's the people, my 99, and influencing them and empowering them and releasing them. That's really the take. This is how we are effective digitally. Maybe it's about helping others discover their God-given mission and helping them achieve that, instead of trying to get something happening in the physical space that may be of attention today. So think differently, work through some different options, and discover maybe this is a chance to re-up and do something different for the kingdom and re-engage a volunteer base differently. I appreciate you all and would love to help however I can.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. I am grateful. All right. You teed up my next slide beautifully. All right. This is the New Orleans church planter in me coming out here. You're getting a little lagniappe, okay? That means a little something extra, a little bit of bonus, all right? Not just 10 engagement lessons. Here's 3 more. Jeff said it. I agree. We think this is the greatest opportunity in our lifetimes for the spread of the gospel. We believe that the internet is our era's Roman road. It was built by the empire. We can exploit it for the kingdom. We can use it to share the gospel. All right? We already said this about children's ministry, but it's true for all of it. We're all in early stages of iteration. No one has got this figured out. There are people that we can look to and learn from who are ahead of us. And if they're honest, and most of them are, they'll tell you, you know what? We've made some mistakes, and we're doing some things differently today than we were doing before. And then finally, this is something that I want to just pray over all of you. Fatigue leaders, we're all there. This has been a year. Oh, my Lord. It's hard for us to make good decisions. And so with that in mind, let me offer this encouragement. This is, I'm going to be reading from John chapter 5, and I won't read the entire passage. I'll commend it to you. John 5, 1 through 13. This is the healing at the pool of Siloam. And when asked about who did it, the man replied, well, the man who made me well told me to. All right. He said, take your bedroll and start walking. Let that be an encouragement to us that we do what we're told to do, and not worry about who told, or who's asking questions. All right. So let's press into some questions that you should be asking for yourself, in order to kind of unpack and create your own Phygital strategy. All right. First up is this: what is your strategy for people who live more than 30 minutes from your physical location, who are currently or have engaged with you online? This is a decision that you need to make. There's not a right or wrong answer, but if you leave it unanswered, that is wrong. So you need to decide, am I going to continue to pastor and minister to these people, or are we going to do our best to connect them to a church in their local content? It's up to you, but you've got to answer that question one way or the other. Next question is, where do you see digital fitting in? Is this a campus? Is it an extension? Is it just meant to introduce people? Is it your front door or your screen door? Do you have this integrated approach? Is it designed to complement what you're doing, or is it something outside of what you currently do that you recognize as a mission field? Again, no right or wrong answer, but a question that you need to answer for yourself and the church and the community, the ministry that you've been called to, your context. You also need to think about, okay, how do we actually do the work of ministry, which is equipping people? What does that mean in the digital space? How much responsibility, how much authority, how much influence? Where are the guardrails for your lay leaders? Because none of you is saying, oh gosh, I don't have enough to do. Give me more work. You're all listening to this Phygital presentation going, wow, this is a lot of work. Who's going to help you do it, and what authority are you going to give them? In the future, 3 years from now, do you see your church as dual or even omni-channeled, or are you going to focus exclusively on one versus the other? Increasingly, we're seeing churches pivot to not just digital first, but digital only. Now, if you already have an existing location and property, unless the Lord speaks to you audibly, I would suggest that you should probably continue in physical ministry. But if you don't have that, if you're a church planter or you're at a church plant that doesn't have a physical space, now's the time to ask this question. Do we just lean in hard to digital, or do we do digital and physical? Which is it? Again, no right or wrong, but what's your answer? And then finally, how do you see your staff or your team aligning with that strategy? Are you coordinating this off and saying, you know what, we've got a specific group that this is what they do, or is this something that we all do together? Is there a designated point person? Is this, fall into the rubric of worship because, that's what we're broadcasting? And I'd point you back to the beginning of the presentation and say, well, broadcasting in and of itself is not enough. But these are all questions you need to be asking. And then finally, I want to leave you with this one. Who are you leaning into with regularity to dream with, to learn from, and to consider how to navigate the new Phygital realities of the church? That is, in and of itself, the reason that we created this Phygital learning community. So I want to jump back into the breakout rooms for a second and ask those questions of yourself, as well as press into what do we want to hear in the remainder of our time. All right, so we're going to jump back into our breakouts for a few more minutes, and then we'll come back maybe shortly and land the plane. Well, hey, I want to pick up kind of right where we left off in the last session. I asked a question: who are you meeting with regularly to ask some of these questions, to have this conversation? Here comes not the hard sell, but the invitation, rather. I want to encourage you to consider checking out one of these Phygital learning communities. You can sign up by just going to stadiachurchplanning.org/Phygital. Maybe Jen can put that link in the chat. But the next round is beginning April 20 and 21. So it's definitely plenty of time for you to sign up. Bonus, it is available for free to church planters, but if you're an existing established church, we would love to have you help participate and underwrite that. So I want to say just a few more things about, well, what exactly is that and what can we look forward to there, and try to encourage you before I take some questions and we fully land the plane. So this quote from Peter Drucker, I think, is pertinent to the context because all of us are asking what's next. Let's define that. Let's create it. Let's give it shape. Let's let the church lead in this space and time. And as we consider what does it mean to be Phygital, let's decide the answer for ourselves and let's do it together with others in the context of a learning community. So what exactly is a Phygital learning community? First of all, it's not a silver bullet. We don't have all the answers, but we ask a lot of really good questions. And then usually somebody says something intelligent. I'm looking at my friend Dan, and he will often add some brilliant insight. Or if Dave were a part of it, I think, gosh, it would be so much richer. Or some of the other folks, Micah, who's also a leader in this cohort, great insights. So let's get together intentionally, strategically, and have a desired outcome of, hey, all of us are going to leave this 10-week cohort with an engagement pathway determined. All of us are going to, figure out what does that mean? How do we answer those questions for our community, our context? You will not be the first in. You have the advantage of all the early adopters who've gone before you. This is just an example. I think to date we're close to, it's probably close to almost maybe 200 churches across the country. This was just the first 2 iterations. The third is going on right now. And I'll tell you what, the third is so much better than the first. And even better than the second. So the fourth, the one that I'm inviting you all to consider participating in, will be even more fun. Let's see if this works and you guys can hear this little teaser.
The church has never been a building. The church is not an app. The church is not YouTube. The church is people. But let's use everything we possibly can to help serve the church. We want to turn content into community. Engagement is becoming what people are hungry for. Do we just have an audience, or are we igniting people to become missional people?
It's a lot of fun, friends. We have a good time. I would love for you to join us. So, hey, we got a few minutes left at the end. I'd love to take some of your questions. I'd love to open it back up to maybe a large group dialogue, or we could, I don't know that we want to go back into breakout rooms yet, but would love to hear from some of you who maybe have some experience with this. I'm looking at my friend Dan or Dave or others who have questions about it. Like, if I were curious, wanted to lean in, what would that look like? Or really any of the things that we've talked about up to this point. What questions do you have? What bases have we not covered? Gary, George, Micah, Dave, you guys have all contributed to this series and have had great insights. Look forward to this conversation here.
Yeah, I want to jump in and just say one of the things that really, I mean, there are lots of great ideas and ways to do it, and terminologies and all this, and plan on stealing a good bit of it. But just one thing I'd say that just kind of sticks out to me with anything like this is be intentional. You were hearing some of that come out, and 98% spent on the physical and 2% on the digital. You just gotta spend some time and decide which way you're going to go for it, and go for it with gusto. I remember back to when I was a church planner, I was doing all this stuff with community engagement and outreach, and we were growing. We were seeing some great things happen. And there was a guy I was going to seminary with at the time, and he's like, "Man, if I could spend $30,000 on doing, evangelism and outreach and all this community service stuff, I could do what you're doing too." And he goes, "I just don't have the money for that." And I looked at him, I said, "Your budget is 4 times my budget. You just have different priorities." And I don't know that we ever talked again after that. But you just gotta say, is this really important? Is it worth it? And if so, make it not just your money, but your time. Make it a priority.
I see a question coming in from Kyle Davies down in Van.
Yeah, Generations Church in Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah.
Kyle, I wonder what you mean by that, metrics, because I would argue that they really aren't different. He asked, what are the metrics for churches who embraced Phygital versus those who haven't? At the end of the day, the church is in the disciple-making business, right? And that if we are focused on outcomes versus anything else, they should be the same, whether it's Phygital or digital or physical only. It's, are we making disciples? And actually, we talked about this in our cohort this week. We talked about being outcome focused, habit fueled, and content flavored. So it's not about the content, no matter the context, digital, physical, or somewhere in between. I don't know. Does that answer your question, Kyle, or press in further? That's good.
Well, I mean, if people are digital and you're not physical, and it's not necessarily you're observing them and their interaction with their husband or their wife or their kids, because it's digital and there's not an observance base, how do you know? I mean, what type of things are you talk about new habits. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if it's all digital, how do you know if any of their habits are changed, or if it's just, they're saying the right things when you're on a Zoom together versus experiencing kind of life together. So I know we kind of talked about that hyper local piece, but I got to imagine that we got to have some way to quantify or name some key indicators for discipleship or disciple making in a digital space. Because if all they're doing is showing up online, I mean, it's kind of the same thing of if people are just showing up in person on Sunday, that doesn't mean necessarily life change. So how do you quantify, or what are some indicators of life change when your primary connection for people is solely digital?
Oh, great question. And I'm so glad, Kyle, that you recognize it is the same in the physical space, where we have people who show up, but they aren't experiencing that life transformation. And so, again, I would argue the metrics are the same. Are people actually making decisions to follow Jesus? Are they choosing to be baptized? Are they reorienting their life around the gospel? Are they allowing what they're learning in the church and whatever medium to influence the choices that they make in their day-to-day life, the way that they spend their money and where they spend their time and who they spend it with. All of those are metrics that transcend the context. And can they be measured when you don't see someone physically? Actually, yeah, quite a bit. So I don't know. Dave's going to say something smart here. I see him.
I think the key phrase that Kyle said was, doing life together or something like that. You said, it's that sense of observing one's life. And the reality is I can walk into my church on Sunday morning and walk out and have been present, have heard the word, and have zero engagement or interaction with anybody else that's there that morning. And so I think the challenge, whether you're in a digital space or you're in a physical space, is to get people into smaller communities, smaller groups, whether that's meeting in someone's house or whether that's meeting online in a Zoom group where you can actually have conversation, because that's where engagement happens. And the truth is, I can lie to you in my men's small group about whether I'm doing what I said I was going to do just as easily online as I can in my basement, And so I think, again, there's the sense of how do we break down community to the smaller size and not think, I got such a huge reach and we've got so many viewers and that's success. And I'm reminded, Jeff was talking about Seth Godin and he talks also about the reality of using proxies to measure things that we cannot actually measure. And in the church, we use attendance and offerings often to measure engagement or even hopefully, our church is growing somehow. And the reality is it's a substitute. It's a substitute because we can't really measure life change and transformation the way we want in a large group. We measure that by actually doing life together. So,
Dave, I love what you said in our first breakout about the difference between what pastors want and what teachers want. I think the whole group needs to hear that.
Yeah. So, the reality is every pastor I know wants a larger congregation or wants to be able to speak to a larger audience. And every school teacher I know wants a smaller classroom. And in fact, they would tell you that 30 is too big. 20 is probably pushing it. My son had the privilege of being in a class where there were only 13 students in the public school system, which was awesome. And he got so much attention and he learned so much. And he even had to deal with, life issues like temper and other things that showed up in that classroom. And I'm so grateful for the smaller size. So why do we want something so large? Why don't we actually equip leaders to lead disciple-making groups who raise up disciple-making leaders that launch a movement?
So good. So good. Hey, I want to call something out in the chat here. Both Micah and Dan noted Next Wave, which is a book by Steve Pike, has a great list of metrics to speak to that question. I don't know if Micah or Dan, either of you want to press into that a little bit further. I know that's a great resource for these questions.
Go, Micah.
He's frozen. Or he's contemplating his response.
No, he's not.
A little
He's
unstable,
frozen.
but it's a great question.
He's faking it. Micah was faking being frozen.
I don't know if you can hear me because the internet's wonky, but it's a great resource. Really good.
Yeah, Steve Pike leads a church planting movement based in Denver and with young planters in both urban and rural settings. He's just noticing the metrics of the 20th century church had less and less resonance in both rural and urban, and he thinks suburban as well. And so the 12 metrics are really worth the read. Micah and I are not going to get any cut of the profits, which is a shame. But Next Wave, Steve Pike, is well worth it for those 12 shifts.
That's great. That's a great recommendation. Nathan, I think the point Kyle was making, I would just second his point about metrics, that no question that what you point to as outcomes is the same. But the question that, and I do believe this is missing, in our list of questions, that what's missing I haven't seen Steve Pike's work, so I'll grab that right away. But what's missing are some reliable lead metrics. I'm a church growth guy. There's a bunch of us on the call here who are long in the tooth, and our hair has turned gray and it's now turning loose. And as a result, we're trying to catch up with things. I'm one of those, and I find that to my chagrin, most of what we've used for metrics in the church growth field have been lag metrics. It's looking back over your shoulder to measure, what happened last Sunday or last month, whatever. And you had a quote, you had one of your slides. I don't remember who said it in your slide, but the point was, if you show me your discipleship process and pipeline, I'll show you the future of your church. And we can, in fact, measure those things. It's just, somebody take this and make it a more gracious statement. But from my chair, what concerns me as my life grows shorter, and I think we're getting closer when Jesus is coming back. I personally think it's just simply lazy to say we are doing life together, and that's our discipleship process. Because that doesn't, Eugene Peterson said, just by standing in a barn doesn't make you a horse. And I think that's the same point.
Amen. Amen.
It doesn't get us there. And honestly, we've spent millions of dollars and had really gifted leaders very eloquently say basically that. We're doing life together, and it's just awesome. And I appreciate that. I'm not throwing stones at that. I'm just saying, I don't want to be standing in Jesus' presence when he comes back. And the only thing I can say is, well, you're right. We haven't made many disciples, but we've sure had a good time. We've been doing life together, and it's grand. So just, again, qualify myself as being from a generation behind most of the current leaders, and also the fact that I was schooled in a system that basically focused on lag metrics. But I believe, and Reggie McNeil's one of these that said it quite a while ago. Evidently Steve Pike is saying it, but we've got to figure that out, and it's missing, and those criteria are not clear and not agreed on.
Yeah. So first, let me give some language to you're talking about, the lead measure versus the lagging indicator. So if you all haven't read 4DX, 4 Disciplines of Execution, that's where that language comes from. And George is absolutely right. We can't measure things that we look back and really had no control or influence over the outcome. We want to know, what are the leading measures, the things that we actually can influence, that we predict will lead to the outcomes that we want. And one such resource, and the reason I mention this is because it's amazing. We have this conversation about Phygital, and we end up spending all this time talking about discipleship and micro churches and how does the church get smaller. And so I haven't finished this one yet. I just ripped into it recently. I'm about a third of the way through it. I think it releases publicly very soon, but highly recommend this. So if you're familiar with the starfish and the spider, the authors take that concept and build upon it. And this really resonates with Dave's contribution to this series in the sort of what was the language? The church distributed. Thank you. I'm finding this, and anybody who's talking about discipleship as being someone that I want to look to and learn from for those lead measures, for those things that we can actually influence, that we believe will predict the types of outcomes that we want to see. And so that, again, is regardless of the context or the medium, and recognizing, hey, what we're doing in person or online, at the end of the day, if it's not leading or pointing us in the direction of healthy disciples, yeah, we're hanging out and having fun. And Yeah, no, I absolutely fair question, George. I don't know that anybody's got the answer, but I think discipleship has got to be a part of it.
Hey,
And that,
Chivo,
yeah.
not to cut you off there, but I mean, so you've got 3 cohorts of this Phygital. You're almost through the third. Has anyone talked about anything new that people are tracking instead of the traditional metrics? So that would just be my question. Has there been anything new where say, hey, we're not sure if this is the way forward, but we're going to start tracking this to see if this is actually could be a new lead measure or even a new lag measure on the other side of things.
Yeah, no, it's all about the different ways people are engaging and experiencing life transformation. So it's not new or ground shattering. It's different. It's no longer reach. It's no longer nickels and noses. It is that life transformation. So yeah, we are almost out of time. I want to make sure that I leave space for the rest of our co-facilitators. I want to thank Gary Irby and Natalie Hammond for their leadership in this, Dave DeVry, Micah Dodson, George Johnson. There's so many other people who've been involved and a part of making this come to fruition. We look forward to sharing it and seeing you leverage it and utilize it in your spaces so that some of these insights can be shared beyond. And we look forward to follow-up. So thank you for sharing your time with us today. Thank you for being a part of this series. Again, they're all hosted on the church planting website where we registered. So we'll get a copy of this and more. And let's keep at it together for the kingdom. How's that sound? Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, bless you all. Thank you. We'll see you next time.